I think that's gone really well. Folks have enjoyed being able to use ClassLink to use single sign-on. There have been a few hiccups with the icon being in different spots or moving places sometimes, and I think we just wanted to make sure to clarify the best way to get support. In case you're having an issue with ClassLink. So unfortunately, if you are not able to see the icon in ClassLink under like SC Learn or StateLink, however it is, PCG is not able to help with that. So if you, so that would probably be your like district IT folks or ClassLink that you need to reach out to. So in cases where that's been happening, we've been getting emails and we feel bad having to tell them like we don't have any control over anything happening inside of ClassLink. So we just want to remind folks to reach out to your IT people, and Jeff Henry here at the State Department, kind of is the person that can support with that. And Nick, I don't know if there's any other clarification you wanted to add to that.
No, I think that's well summarized. I think the big differentiator is if the icon is just not present for someone at all, you will not see, or we won't be able to give much assistance there. But if the icon is there and they click it and there's an error message, that's something that we can help with. So if the icon is totally missing, go to SCDE or district IT staff first. If the icon is there for someone, they say that they can see it, but clicking on it isn't allowing them to log in, we can help with that. We just can't help if the icon is not there at all.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to jump into the first thing I know folks are probably have lots of table 4 and kind of child count federal reporting questions, and we are going to get to all those. That we've left plenty of time to go through all that, but we did want to go over the October release notes. I think Katie sent those out with the agenda for this meeting, and we want to talk about what's coming up in October. The things that will be released in October will be live on Halloween. So on 10/31, these things will go live, and this is a relatively small changes, but we want to make sure power users have an understanding of what's coming so that you can support your users and communicate this information. So these release notes have been sent out by Katie. They'll also be posted in the resource information widget. And like I said, they'll go live on the evening of 10/31, and they'll be active in the system on 11/1. There are a few things that will change in the workspace, very minor things that are changing in the workspace, but that is just a reminder that, if you've had a meeting, for example, like on 10/31, but you don't finalize it and go in the next day, stuff will have changed overnight, and so you want to make sure stuff is being finalized before this update happens. All right, so I'm going to show you these on our staging site in the system, so just so you can kind of get a sense. But the first one is the transportation request form. There's been a change related to that, so I'm going to come over to our staging site. So I'm in a student, and I'll talk through what this change is. This is a change related to the transportation request form. So I'm going to come into special considerations, and I've got yes next to transportation. And then if I scroll down to that section, what the change here is that whatever I type in this box where it says describe further what is needed for the child and how this need will be met to ensure the student is safely transported, whatever I type in this box is going to transfer onto the transportation request form. So I've just typed that here, and then I'm going to click complete transportation request. And when I come now into my transportation request form and I enter all this information, as I scroll down, you'll see that this question is here. And then whatever I type in that box back on the special considerations page, that's going to show up here. And this is so that whoever's receiving this transportation request form, they'll be able to have all the context and information about why the child is receiving special transportation It's the same down here, that this rationale is also going to print. So going back to our release notes, that described further field currently right now, it's not present on the document, and after October it will be present. So that's that change. The next one is related to signatures. So this is mostly implemented for example, if folks are joining meetings virtually and they're trying to sign the document and there were, issues with the document disappearing and that kind of stuff. So if I come into a place where I'm going to add signatures, so I'll just come to the Create IEP page. There's not a lot that you'll actually see in the system related to this, but if I click on Add Signature, when I add my signature and hit Save and Close, it not only is going to save the signature, but it's going to save and reload the entire page. So you can see that saved icon comes up. So that kind of locked in that signature now. So that's a change. That's going to help so that if multiple people are joining and trying to sign at the same time, it's going to make it so that those signatures won't disappear. So that's that signature. Anytime where you're adding a signature, it's going to save the page as well. So a small tweak. It's not going to look any different in the system, but that is going to help with signatures being locked in and not disappearing and that kind of stuff. All right, this next item is additional team members. So I'm going to come over to the IEP and go to the IEP overview. So currently in the system, if I want to have additional team members, so someone here, like let's say that an advocate or someone who's not a regular IEP team member shows up to the meeting, currently what I would have to do is I would have to come up to student info tab, sorry, in the staging site, there's lots of extra menus. I would have to come up into the menu here and add a new parent or other and add them to the team. And so that's not super necessary if they're not going to be an ongoing member of the team. So what we've added here is that after the update comes on the 31st, you can just add them down here. So if I wanted to add Nick, and he is participating as a social worker, I can add him, and then I could keep clicking this plus button, and I could add additional people to the team. Now, this doesn't actually save them to the team. So if I know that Nick, the social worker, is going to come to this eval planning, and they're going to come to the IEP and all these other things, then it may make sense to go ahead and add them, and that way they'll show up here. But if it's just more like a one-off, I can add them here. And I can also add the other folks that are participating this way. And then when I click save, these people will kind of be added to the document and show up on the team. So that is what we mean by additional team members. You can just add them by clicking that little plus button and continue to add folks. And then it's going to print their title that you've added in the system. I'm going to pause there and make sure we don't have any questions based on what we have looked at. Am I still echoing? Nick, do I sound echoey?
You sound better. I'd appreciate someone else confirming maybe in the chat. I heard it at the start and I think y'all changed something, but sounds pretty good to me.
All right, the next item coming up in this October release. Oh, Lindy, good question. Yeah, so when I add them to the folks down here, they will show up for the signature page. So you can see I've added them here, and if I were to print this document, they would show up on that document as well. And then the next part update is the signatures on the printed document. So this goes for the eligibility determination, reevaluation eligibility determination, IEP, ISP, and FBA. We have fixed, there was just some inconsistencies across those different signature pages, basically on how they were formatted. And so, for example, previously it used to say on some of them, it would say like signature and then their name and then whatever role they played. And so now, and it was sometimes it was inconsistent across the different documents. So now on all of those documents, it's always going to say kind of basically this formula, right? It's going to say the name of the participant and then in parentheses, whatever their title is in the system. So like if it was Sherry Evans, it would say Sherry Evans, and then in parentheses, whatever her title is, like speech and language pathologist, and then whatever role she's playing in the meeting. So then it would be like she could have been playing the evaluation specialist role or the LEA role, whatever their role is. You can kind of see the example down here under Sally Speech. It says their name, and then in parentheses, SLP, and then LEA representative. So it's always going to be their name, title, role across all those different documents. All right. And then in the IEP signature panel, this was just a minor tweak. Previously up here, it said title. And when in reality, it's actually showing their role in the meeting. So whatever role they've been selected for on the IEP overview page, it's gonna show what their role is, and then these people, their role is additional team members. So if I come over to the Create IEP page, the minor tweak here is that instead of saying title, that's what it currently says. After 1031, it'll say role, because that is actually what is displayed here. All right, the FBA signature panel. So previously, the FBA signature panel functioned in a different way. So let me go into an FBA. So it still functions the same way. I can add who's participating in this meeting. Just like in the other processes, I can click this plus button and add additional team members. And then previously in the FBA, it would not show a signature panel until I selected either, if based on the FBA, a BIP is not needed at this time, then the signature panel would appear here. If I selected based on the FBA, a BIP will be developed, it wouldn't show the signature panel on the FBA, but it would show it on the BIP. So what this change is doing, as you can see, is that the signature panel on the FBA is always going to appear. It doesn't matter what the decision is of the team. 100% of the time, you will always sign the FBA. So functions just like other parts of the system. I could come in here and add my signature, and then I'll always sign the FBA. So that's the change there. It's no longer contingent on selecting these things. So that's what we outline there, is that it'll always be constant and won't depend on the decisions panel. And then it'll also be added to the print documents. So the participants in the FBA meeting will print on the document. And then for the BIP, it will no longer include signatures. So I think the theory behind this is that the BIP is typically reviewed in the context of an IEP. And so there's not a place for signatures on the BIP. So if I scroll down here, you can see that there's no longer a place where you're signing on the BIP side of things. So that's the change there. It's no longer contingent on what's happening with that. And while I'm on this page, another update that's coming is on this BIP implementation and review dates panel. I would put the current implementation date. This is like when we're starting and going to implement this BIP. And then as I come and do BIP reviews, so if I click add a BIP review, I can say, okay, we're reviewing it on, 10/16. And then we're going to review this again on, a month from now on 11/17 is the next time we're going to review. So this is a new field. This date of next review field is a new field. And there is a notification that will come to the case manager and notify them when they need to do this review. So whatever date they put in here, we've set up some alerts so that I think, Nick, I don't know if you have this info, but I think it's like they'll get a notification 10 days before the event, 5 days before the event, and on the day of the event. It's something like that. Actually, it might say in the release notes, but that date of next review is a new field. And so you would complete that when you're doing your BIP review. And then you would write your notes and make your determination. And then every time I come in and add a new BIP review, I can add a new date of the next review. That's a required field. And that is talked about right here. Next review notification. All right, so the one I skipped was the IEP placement panel. So in the IEP process, I can't show you this one actually because I'll just show you in the document here. So currently in the current IEP placement page workspace, there's an LRE table down at the bottom that calculates the LRE based on the services entered. And that in the update that's coming in November, that table will be gone. It will no longer be present. It won't print on the document, and it will not be present in the workspace. So what actually matters is what the team selects. So it's these questions that will show. It won't. This table was kind of automatically calculating based what was on the IEP. And I know as folks know, there were lots of concerns with like the next school and it calculating the percentages correctly and like all those different pieces. And I think a lot of effort was being made to make sure that this table looked correct. And it was determined that it's actually not required for that information to be in the IEP. And so that table has been removed. It will no longer show up in the workspace and it will no longer print on the IEP. So this is probably one of the bigger changes in that, if you're in the middle of writing an IEP or about to finalize an IEP, if you want to make sure you finalize your IEP, because if you come into that IEP on November 1st, this table will no longer be present. This will no longer be present. Obviously, you're still selecting the placement. All of those questions are still being answered. It's still being captured. It's just no longer in the workspace. So I'm going to pause there and make sure there aren't any questions about that placement table. Doesn't look like there is. And then I'll just give a preview for what's coming in December. In December, there is a change to this placement table. We wanted to wait to do any of these changes until after child count. And so there will be the ability in December to select multiple LREs. So like if I'm a preschool age student and for this part of the IEP, I'll be and then once school starts, I'll be a different LRE. There'll be a way on the placement page to select these multiple LREs based on the dates. So kind of more to come after that. So Lori, looking at your question, yes, the child count question is going to continue to be an option. So those questions haven't changed. It'll look exactly the same. And actually, I'll pull that up just so we can have on the screen what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about this placement page. The only thing that's changing on this page is this panel will no longer be there. So on 11.1, you will no longer see this panel, but these questions will still exist in the exact same form as they are currently. so the update that's coming will be in December, where it'll be selecting the placement, different placements based on the dates of the IEP. All right, Catherine, will there somewhere that will show the total number of minutes and services percentage? No. Is there any way to remove the option for LRE placement so the wrong one is not mistakenly selected? I think you're talking like among these ones. Yeah, I don't know. Please keep the questions coming so that we can, we can get with Katie and OSIS to kind of talk through, what that will look like. All right, I'm gonna keep going. I think those are the main ones. We talked about the BIP review date will be there. Oh, and then this last one. So this is on the IEP page. This actually isn't a change. To what's in the workspace. But let me go to the page. So this is just some change in behavior. So on the Create IEP page, there's this this contact information panel has always been there, and it says in the info box, it says information pertaining to individual other than main contact that the parent can contact for information. So currently it'll print whatever name you put in here, and that's the only contact that will show up on the document. After November 1st, 100% of the time, whoever is listed as the case manager, it's going to print their information. And then this box will print a second person for them to contact. So I think the best way to show this is in the print document. So currently it's just been listing one person, and it's the person who is listed here. After the October release, it's always going to list the case manager, and then it's going to list this second person. So the training point for your users is that if in this box, if Isla Horton is the case manager and I put Isla Horton's information here, then on the print document, it's going to print Isla Horton's information twice. So the training point is that you want to kind of pay attention to this info box and have someone other than the case manager, other than the main contact listed here. So this would be for the parent to know there's a second person that I can list here. And don't list the case manager twice. Or you can just leave this blank and it'll only list the case manager. But the training point here is to don't just list the case manager twice, or you're going to see on the print document where it's going to print the same person's information twice. Okay, so I think that is all the information on the release notes. Yeah, and so we'll go through those placement questions. Chair, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I think there's probably some more guidance needed.
See Catherine's question about guidance in the information box. Catherine, we are working to put together some guidance to help you determine which box to check. So that is that's on the to-do list.
All right. So we'll keep moving right along. Then the next couple of just kind of quick updates, and then we'll get down to the table 4 and reporting kind of questions. So inactive students, Katie sent an email out about these next couple things, but I just wanted to reiterate them. So inactive students, the location of that for user types has changed. It used to be that inactive students, especially for like the level 3 user types, so like school psychologists and speech pathologists, team lead case manager, they did not have access to view inactive students. based on feedback, we've opened that option up for those user types to be able to see inactive students. And that is found under the Find Students menu, inactive students. Previously, for like district admin and power users, you would have to go under admin. So the location of where you find inactive students now is under Find Students. And so if you wanted to find an inactive student, you would go under Find Students, inactive students. So that's just a reminder that the location of where that menu is has recently changed. I think the other thing I'll point out is the key dates. So this came up in our evaluator webinar. Power users have always had the edit key dates, and they'll continue to have the ability to edit key dates. So, but we made an update and removed the ability for additional user types to have the ability to edit key dates. And in that update, we inadvertently removed the whole key dates menu. And so we recently fixed that. And now those level 3 user types have this menu item again, the key dates menu. And so now those folks can see, they can't edit anything on this page, but at a minimum, they're able to come in and see the key dates page. So only power users have the ability to edit anything on this page. And again, I'll just encourage you to use that power sparingly. But users now, level 3 user types now will find this key dates menu under their student info tab. So hopefully that will help them as they're kind of keeping track of the updates. All right, progress reports is the next item on the list. And I can speak to this one as well. So we have a big update coming to progress reports. Well, kind of a big update. It's a formatting update happening in December. So let me go into a progress report real quick so I can show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to create a progress report. And currently, as you guys will note, in the progress report, the way it's formatted is there's a table across the top. Whoops, I need to choose a different reporting period. There is a table across the top that shows every single reporting period that you added. So that means that if you've added quarter 1, interim 1, quarter 2, interim 2, quarter 3, ESY dates, it becomes a very cluttered table across the top that shows all these different reporting dates. So let me just come in here and generate this so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So in this update that's coming in December, the way that this progress report formats is that it will only show the reporting periods where there have been comments entered. So currently the way it looks is that whatever reporting periods I have, they'll print across the top. And so that means in some districts, if you've gone in and added, 8, 10, 20 different reporting periods, they're printing every single reporting period for every student across the top. The update that's coming in December is changing the way that this is formatted so that it will only print the reporting periods where comments have been made. And so that means that you could add all of those, interim reporting periods and ESY reporting periods and all that. And as long as the teacher doesn't enter anything under those reporting periods, then they're not going to print on the progress report. And so what that means is that in the short term, until December comes, our recommendation would be to remove those progress reporting periods so that they're not printing on the document. So if you've added a bunch of ESY reporting periods or interim reporting periods beyond December, our recommendation would be to remove those so that they don't print because you're not going to have them, no data is going to be there. And once the change to the way this is formatting comes in December, you could add those back and they won't print anymore. And I recognize that might be a confusing thing. and let me just go in here to the calendar and show you guys, and please put in the chat if there are questions related to this. Oh, I gotta be a different user type. Hold on. So hopefully everyone just has sort of district managed reporting periods. So if I come into edit school years and under reporting periods, I come to this school year 24-25 and click on edit. You have the ability to enter all these extra periods. And as I've seen some districts where there are like 10 or 15 different reporting periods. And so those are printing on every progress report. And so my recommendation right now would be to delete the reporting periods from this main calendar that are happening through like after December. So I would delete these 3 and I would update the database so that they would disappear and no longer be there. And then everyone can progress report. And then what I would do is come back and add them after the update in December. And this is really just an optional thing, and it's just cosmetic. It'll just make it so that your progress reports between now and December won't be cluttered with all the extra spaces across that until that formatting is fixed. So hopefully I didn't confuse everybody. You're also welcome to just leave it as it is if this isn't an issue for you. All right, checking the chat. Karen, what level user types can see inactive students? It's anything level 3 and above. So your district admin, level 2 user types, level 1 user types, and level 3 can all see inactive students. All right. Reactivated students. So this is a question that came in through the survey for related to office hour topics. And so we wanted to talk about this one real quick. And the question basically was, how can we identify students who automatically become active in Ed Plan upon returning to our district, especially if they were dismissed from services while in another district? So I think this scenario, kind of interpreting the scenario, is that if a student who, let's say they were active in our district, had an IEP, and then they transfer out and they're no longer in the data feed, so they automatically become inactive in Ed Plan, and they go to another district out of state. And then I think the question is, then they come back, they all of a sudden become eligible, or they enroll in our district again, become active in PowerSchool, and now they are active because of that in Ed Plan. The question is how do we know that they've shown up that way? Because Ed Plan will just automatically activate them. And if they weren't exited or nothing happened, they're going to show back up in your district and everything's going to look overdue. And so I think this question is related to, how do we know that? Is there a way that we can know that? And so one thing that you could, the way you might know that would be under find students and then student search. I think being able to run the advanced search for students that don't have a case manager would likely be a good clue of a student who maybe has become active and that no one's paying attention to. So I could click under advanced student search that only students with no case manager currently assigned, and then that would tell me, okay, maybe the student doesn't. I will say if they were only gone for a short period of time and they had a case manager and then they become active again in your district, whoever that old case manager was, as long as they're still in your district, they're going to show back up on that case manager's caseload. So that would sort of be the other thing, is that in their My Students widget, those case managers need to be paying attention, because if they have 10 kids on their caseload and all of a sudden there's an 11th, that means that 11th student has now re-enrolled, and that case manager is they're going to show back up on that student's caseload. But there's not a way that the system is necessarily flagging those kids that all of a sudden become active again, especially if they are transferring from out of state or something like that. So part of the issue here is that you would need to um, you know, it's the same as it's always been, right? Paying attention to when the students get enrolled. Ed plan's not necessarily going to be able to tell you if that student became active again and when. It's going to have to rely on someone in that building notifying you of, hey, this student is back, and then you can go look them up in Ed plan. So, but there's not like a report or a way to know. There is information you could pull in advanced reporting around students who transferred in if they did the transfer process. But I think this question was more around they were gone and now they're active again. And how do we know? And Ed plan is not necessarily able to tell you that. So hopefully that answers that question. Nick, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on how that can be solved.
Yeah, I think I'll type this in the chat too, so folks have it for reference. In advanced reporting, you could filter for events that have an event type of re-entry. So if a student was in your district, left and came back, there's a special event type called re-entry. And if you filter on those re-entries, you'll be able to identify these students. But that would require the creation of an AR report. It's not directly within Ed plan. I don't know if you'll find a re-entry on a kid fill in training. It's probably
training,
rare.
yeah, but it's under the events tab. It's there. Sonia, I don't know if I know what you mean. Can that be turned off somehow? Like, we definitely there's not a way for us to turn off if a student becomes active in your Power School. They're active in Ed plan. It's the way it functions. So there's not a way for us to not reactivate that student. But yeah, I don't see. But in your event history, there's a re-entry event when the student, if they left and then they come back. So what Nick is talking about is that you could create there could be a report that could tell you when re-entry events happen. But yeah, I don't see a re-entry event for this student. Okay. All right, Nick, I think I'm going to let you take the next 3 items.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. So I'll start by talking about the test school, and then we'll talk about table 4, and we'll talk about child count last. For each of these, I'm going to overview what you see in the advanced report, and then based on support tickets we're receiving in Zendesk and discussions with folks at OSIS, the most common things that need to be corrected, and then a little demo of how to do those corrections. But we're going to start at the very top with test schools. So for a test school in your system, we filter them out of the advanced report. And Phil, I might have you stay in training if I could direct you to pull up a school. For us to filter these schools out, we have to use some common characteristics. So there's kind of 2 ways we check to filter out your test schools. And as Phil's page loads, the bottom line is if you see test students inside of your federal reporting data, please submit a Zendesk ticket to us. We can identify why they're there and get them removed. What I'm going to show you is the most common reason the students still might be showing up. So Phil can open a given school's profile. So he's seeing something unique to the training site, which is school areas, which do not matter to you. But if you click Phil on SCDE on the far left, and then choose a school. So Phil will pull up SCDE Elementary School. There's 2 things we rely on to filter out these schools. One is that checkbox, the test school checkbox. That was set when a test school was first created in your system, but there's a chance that that has been unchecked throughout time. So if you see in your district, when you go to admin search schools, that your test school does not have this checked, just give it another check mark and then it will be caught by the filtering. So that's the easiest and most straightforward way to make sure that that box is checked. But we know that that box can become unchecked. So a second thing we filter on is the presence of the literal letters test school in the name. So if the phrase test school is present where Phil is highlighted right now, students in that school would be taken out of your federal reporting output because it's a test school. What this does not catch are all possible variations of this. Maybe you called it sample school, or maybe you called it Charleston County test school. You know, any variation away from those patterns would cause that school to not be filtered out. So if you are seeing test students in your federal data, 2 steps. 1, come in here and make sure the test school box is checked. 2, make sure that the school name contains or just is test school. And then if you've done both those things and you still are seeing the issue, let us know in Zendesk and we can help identify it. But those 2 things, the checkbox and the name, should take care of 99% of these issues. Any questions on that? Anything folks in PCG or OSIS would like to add, or any questions from folks out there listening? I think we've gotten through the vast majority of these, but I know it was a trend about 2 weeks ago. Okay, Amanda not seeing the test school box. All right, I'll check with our product team on that to make sure you can see that, the test school option. Okay. So if you're running into that difficulty and you're still seeing test schools showing up in your data, change the name. In the interim, that will take care of it. And then I'll make a note, Phil and I will go back with our team and make sure you can see the checkbox as well.
Yeah, it looks like maybe that's a user type permission that we need to turn on. But I will say that when we initially set up your sites for every single school district, there is a test school that is present, and we initially named it test school. And so unless someone's gone in there and changed it, it should be named test school. And so therefore it should be filtered out, even if this box isn't checked. But the box should be checked and it should be filtered out in your test school for those students so that they won't show up in your, and then the students that we imported also all have a similar naming convention, so that if we do need to filter those out of a report, we can filter them by their last name. I think their last name is Test. So, you know, we want to make sure that it's nice to be able to have a test school, you know, if you're doing training or you need to test something out in your system without having to go to the training site. But we recognize that, yeah, we don't want the federal reporting data to be, you know, messed up or inaccurate based on having test students in the system. So we try all these ways to filter them out.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate for folks, thanks for letting us know in the chat that you don't see test school. We're going to make sure we collaborate with our product team to get that showing up for you. But in the meantime, the name test school will also cause it to be filtered out. And if you are seeing these students in your data, just submit a Zendesk ticket and we can clear those up. I don't think we have many of these instances left, but probably about a month ago, this was a very common trend. So, all right. Phil, are you already impersonating a power user, or are you as yourself? Because I'll switch the screen here if you're not impersonating.
Yeah, I'm as myself, but I can find a power user.
No, it's okay. I'll steal the screen. All right. So the next 2 topics we want to discuss broadly are Table 4 and child count. And there's some things that relate to both of these reports, so I'll kind of deal with those first, namely the grades you're seeing for students and how to correct common mistakes with placement values. So I'm going to talk about that first. It's not about just child count or just about Table 4, but I'm going to talk about what's going on with grades and with placement for both reports at once. So I'm going to start by talking about grades, and this relates to grade types that may be present in your report because they're present in the data EdPlan gets from EdFi that are not permissible for submission for these report types. So one of the examples I'll use is the grade Z1. The grade Z1 is a valid value inside of PowerSchool and EdFi. EdPlan receives that value and it stands for the first year after 12th grade, but that is not a value that can be submitted in the federal collections. So there's an update coming to the report today for all non-compliant grades except XG that will cause those to be changed to the correct grade. So if a student is tagged as Z1, the first grade after 12th, after this update is applied, they will just show up as 12th grade. Or there are some districts that have the practice of putting students into the graduated grade after they've left your LEA. So you might see graduated underneath the grade type inside of your report. That will be changed to 4th grade. The one time that that is not applicable is the XG grade or the -9 grade inside of PowerSchool and EdFi. This is the extra grade catch-all value that many students might have inside of your report if they're in the SSI school. Because the XG grade doesn't relate to an age, like first grade after 12th grade, Z1, we know that that's beyond 12th grade. So we can safely make that student a 12th grader in the report. If a student is an XG student, we don't know the grade. We can't say exactly what it is. So that is where the correction has to be made directly. It won't be automatically changed by the report. There has to be a correction made. And I'll talk about how to make that correction in a second. I'm going to pause, see if any of my teammates have anything to add or if there are any questions about valid grade types and what's happening. All invalid grade types will be auto-changed except for XG, and I'm going to talk about that right now. AE, yeah, great question, Michonne. We have this slated also to change to 12th grade in the report. AE will be auto dealt with. The only one that won't is XG. Okay. Seeing no questions, going about correcting an XG, and this is where it'll be a little bit different if you're seeing an XG on child count for a student you're serving today versus if you're seeing XG for a student who left your system last August. Those will have different fixes. So if a student is listed as XG and they're being served in your district today, they are active in PowerSchool, and EdPlan is getting their information from EdFi, changing the grade inside of PowerSchool and republishing that information will cause the grade to update. As long as we get that student in the file every night, changing it in EdPlan, as we know, does not change it permanently because you'll change it today, the file will come in overnight, and it'll change back to XG. So if a student is still enrolled in your LEA, you will need to make that change inside of PowerSchool and publish it. This will likely apply to all students on your child count, as well as students who might have transferred to regular ed on your exiting table. Because they're still active in your district, they might have just had a revocation of services. So the key thing is if that student is active today in your district, XG needs to change in PowerSchool and come through EdFi. If they are not active today in your district, that means EdPlan is not getting this information directly from PowerSchool anymore. Make that update inside of EdPlan directly. So if they're active and in the students file, make the change in PowerSchool. If they are inactive or not in the students file, make that change directly in EdPlan. This will be especially pertinent for kids who left last year, because if they exited in August of 2024, EdPlan hasn't gotten information about them in a long time. So you need to change that manually. All right, Sonia, seeing your question, that is happening today to the reports. So if you check them late tonight or tomorrow morning, you will see that update in the grades for both table 4 and child counts for both reports. And Michaela, my 2025 age out students are still active. They still show as 12th grade. So this is another good question. If you have specific student examples, please submit those through Zendesk. That's where we can be most helpful. But if there's a student that's still active in your system now that you know is inactive, that is likely due to a data difference between what you're getting in PowerSchool and what you are seeing and what we receive from EdFi for graduates. And I see you've submitted a ticket, Michaela, so I'll make sure we follow up on that. Really quickly, I'll demo what to do if you're in this situation. So this situation, again, is you have a student that you know is inactive. Maybe they've aged out. Maybe they received a certificate. They're active in your system and you need them to show up on table 4. For a student to show up on table 4, they need to have an exit event during the last reporting year, which spanned from July 1st of 2024 to June 30th of 2025, and they need to have been served when they exited. So if the student was being served in your district last year and they left last year, they will populate on the report. But I think, Michaela, the issue you're describing is there's no exit event, right? They're still active, so EdPlan does not know to put them in the report. If that's the case, you can manually inactivate that student because if they aged out last year, we no longer get that information on a nightly basis. And the way to do this is inside the student info dropdown. If you go to the personal info page, This is something that we probably haven't trained on much because there's not much of a reason to do it except now. In the lower right corner, you'll see the inactivate student button. You click on this button, a bunch of stuff will pop up, but there's only two key fields that you need to fill out. The first is the date exited, and it's important to notice this is going to default to today. And if I just went through with this right now, this student would not show up on table 4 because this exit event is happening today, not last reporting year. So you'd open this up and let's say I know that on May 30th of 2025, they were classified as reaching the maximum age. That wasn't categorized for whatever reason. It wasn't included in the EdFi feed, but now you can do this yourself. So you're going to say on 5/30, they exceeded the maximum age. You do not need to utilize the signature panel, and you can hit save. And then once the system reloads, this student will be inactive. And then you'll see on their student history page, here's the exit event I just made. I'm in as Phil Test, so that's why it says Phil Test. Then if I look on the details pencil, I can confirm this is the reason they left. So just to summarize back, if you have any issues with students that are still showing active but you know should be inactive, EdPlan does not receive that data nightly after the year turns over. So you can do that manually by going to the personal info page, scrolling down, choosing inactive students, making that student inactive with the correct date and reason, and then they'll populate table 4 the next day. All right, Michaela, it looks like that was helpful based on your response. I'm going to pause there and see if folks have questions. The two things we've covered so far are grade changes, when and where to do them, and then manual inactivations, where and when to do them. All right. Seeing no comments or questions, I'm going to get into placement corrections. And really quickly before we do that, Phil, because of my screen setup, I'm going to call on you without preparing you. But do you have Zendesk access or a way you could quickly get into the guide?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm about to show you a number of steps, and it's a relatively complicated process in terms of knowing which to choose. So I want to show you first that everything I'm about to say is included in our table 4 article. So Phil, if you search for exiting table in the articles, we've adjusted these articles based on what we're seeing people ask the most questions about. And this is by far the most common thing, is correcting placements for students who have already exited. So if you go to that top article, Federal Reporting, Exiting Table, and EdPlan Insights. And then if you scroll down, the top of this article is unchanged. This has been here for a while. But the new part of this article is, can you go up another little bit, Phil? Sorry, I didn't coordinate with you before. There we go. Updating placement values. So everything I'm going to run through in this next about 15 minutes of talking is described in text here. How you might need to update a placement value and then why. And then if you scroll down, a large number of you have probably gotten these steps from me in a Zendesk ticket yesterday or today, but it's a step-by-step series of actions that you can take to correct a placement value that is saying none in your report based on the student's conditions. And there's like 2 core conditions that we see that are affecting student records right now. One is students who exited your LEA when they're being served under a comparable services plan. Due to an extra step you need to take on the comparable services plan for reporting, we see that a lot of students with none as placement were because of this, because the comparable services statement was their active plan that they were served under. We're going to go through how to correct that in a second. That's group 1. And then if you scroll down is group 2. And the vast majority of these relate to the enrich migration because we're still working off 24-25 data. There are a lot of students who exited your LEA when they were served under an IEP event that was migrated from enrich. And when that happened, there's a chance the placement value was not included in the migration data set. So you might have an imported IEP event that came from enrich, and then the student left your LEA September 1st of 2024. And they left before you actually even wrote an EdPlan SC IEP, and that Enrich IEP did not have the placement. That's the second most common thing that we're going to talk about, and we're going to show how to address those issues. One last note before I give my voice a brief break and see if there are any questions. These instructions assume that the student is already inactive. So if you look at step 1, and Phil, can you highlight with your mouse step 1? In either set of instructions, the first instruction we give is to go find them in the inactive students menu and reactivate them. But we know there are cases, especially students who transferred to regular ed, they're still active in your district, they're not inactive. So if you need to complete this series of steps for a student who is already active, start at step 2 and finish after step 6. So Phil, if you highlight steps 2 through 6, you'll be able to probably pick this up if you read the instructions, because step 1 says go to inactive and turn them back on. And then step 7 starts saying, here's how you turn them back off. So if you don't need to deal with a student who's inactive, you'll just do steps 2 through 6. If you need to turn the student on and then back off, make sure to follow steps 1, 7, and 8. I'm going to pause speaking for a moment, see what questions there are, and then Phil, I'll steal the screen share back from you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So I'm going to go to a test student and we're going to demo how to do these things. I see there are questions in the chat. Please keep adding those. I'm just going to go through the demos of these actions so that we can have them recorded. And then we'll be able to go back and answer one-on-one questions. But I want to start by just getting through these steps. So the first one I'm going to show you is the series of steps for a student that was served under a comparable services plan. And right now this student is already active. So before I even get into this, I'm going to go make this student inactive. So I take you through the full series of steps here. So what I'm doing right now is just me making them active. So you can ignore this step. And Phil, if you have anything to add for the good of the group, you can toss something out there really quick. All right, so the scenario here is I've looked at my AR report and the student placement comparable, that's their name, is exited. They're showing on the report with the correct exit, but their placement column right now is none. So the first step I'm doing is step number 1 inside of those Zendesk steps, which is to find the student in the inactive students menu. I'll open them up. And then once here, I can reactivate them. I don't need to touch the date, but I want to make sure I reactivate them in the correct grade. So I'll say the student was a 3rd grader at SCDE Elementary. And I'll reactivate them. And I did this morning, so that's telling me you can't do it twice in the same day. Let me correct that really quick. Apologies for the delay, all just one moment. All right. So I've just reactivated my student. Apologies for that. I had done this once getting ready this morning and I can't do it twice in the same day. So that was my issue. So now I'll go refine my student, and this student is now active again. So I've just completed step 1, which is to reactivate them. inside of EdPlan. So when I go to their student history, we'll see a few things now. We'll see the IEP or the comparable services plan the student was served under. We'll see that they exited. And then this is the event I just made a minute ago when I turned them back on. So now when I go into this event and I look at the student's IEP and click on the details pencil, I can see that the placement inside of this details pencil says none. So if you're ever wondering where the value for placement is coming from, go to the IEP event that was last finalized before the student exited and click on the details pencil of that event. So I see right now, this says none. So I need to go and correct that. That's why the report is telling me none. So for the students served under a comparable services plan, I'm just going to open up that document so I can use this as a guide when I go through, because this was the document that was finalized. But if it says none, it means that the placement value was not set in the tiles before you finalize the comparable services plan. So that's what we're going to go fix. I've opened up that comparable services plan, and now that that's open, I'm going to inactivate these two events because I need to go and remake the comparable services plan to save the correct placement value for reporting. So I've checked both these boxes. I'm going to hit save to inactivate them. And now I'm going to go make sure that I've set my placement value correctly before I refinalize the comparable services statement. So I'll go to the IEP process, click on the placement tile, and I'll see here that the student's placement was inside the regular class 40 through 79% of the day. So I just want to make sure that that value is selected. I did this before we got together today, but when you'd come in here, you'd have blank questions. I'd say the student is 6 to 21. They're inside the regular class 40 through 79% of the day. And I'll hit save. I don't need to refinalize the IEP process. I just need this question to be answered when I finalize my comparable services. I'll go back up to plan, go to the comparable services section, and I'm going to refill out the information from the comparable services when it was first generated. That's why you should pull up the PDF before you go back and forth here. So the student information's in the PDF. You're going to want that to be reflected in the interface again. So I'm really quickly going to fill out these fields. I'm not necessarily paying attention to the dates I'm putting, but again, you'd want to pull these off the original document. Choose the LRE value, but again, the one that stores the reporting value is in the IEP process. So it's important that this match so the document looks right, but to make the report work as needed, you need to make that selection in the IEP process. Finish filling this out. I'll create the final document. And the reason I inactivated those IEP events from before is if I tried to do this again on the exact same day, EdPlan's going to say you've already done this before. You can't do it again. So now that that is complete inside of the student history, you're going to see it's going to look exactly like it was before. But the key difference is when I look in the details pencil, there's my placement value. So that value needed to be set in the IEP process when this picture was taken of the student's history. So if the picture was not taken when this value was in there, that's why you're getting none in your report. So now I need to make this student inactive once again. So this was, I believe, step 6 of what is written out in the articles is open up the event you just made and make sure that the placement value is correct. Here I see that it is. So now I need to finally inactivate this student and make them inactive for good. So right now, the exit event that's already there, that's what I want. I know that this student exited before. I don't need to recreate that exit, but I do need to turn this student back off. So I'm going to go into the personal info page like we did before. Scroll down to inactivate, and then I'd inactivate the student. 17. When you come to the reason, you can choose unknown because the actual exit information, it's already there. It's already been saved. I'll click save. And now finally, this is step 8 inside of those instructions. The student is now inactive. When I pull them up in the inactive menu, there's my IEP, and there's my placement value. And then finally, I just want to delete the events I just made. So I'm going to go to these top 2 events I just created by doing this process and inactivate them. Now this student is fully corrected. Their original exit date is still there. Their original exit reason is still there. And their new placement value is now present. It no longer says none, it says 40 through 79. All right, I'm going to take a quick second. I'm going to readjust my screen here, and I'll show you how to do that for a student that was not served under the comparable services. It's very similar. But I'm going to see, Phil, do you mind filtering through what we have in chat? I'm just opening it up and seeing it, but I'm going to get my screen changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think appreciate the folks that, yeah, I agree, Wendy, it is convoluted. That's why we have the steps in there to go through the process. Hopefully, you know, I do see the comments about, you know, could we just do this via an import or something like that? I mean, I think the thinking here is that it should be a relatively low number of students. My understanding is that it's just students that had a comparable services plan, but that did not then end up having an IEP created in EdPlan. So I think there are some challenges with importing this information. But you know, we can go through and talk through that. I don't know if you know, I am surprised by the numbers that are being thrown out, that it's over, you know, 100 students that where this is the situation. Because I agree that this is a lot of information, so we can definitely look at what that, you know, what that process needs to look like. But hopefully this should be a relatively small number of students that are in this situation, because it's only those students that had a comparable services and exited before an actual IEP could be created. Dr. Simmons had the question that I don't know if this is related, Nick. Students on my child count, the errors are showing as LRE age and grade mismatch. I think that's a different issue than the one you're talking through right now, right?
Yeah, we will go there in just a few minutes. So table that one just a moment, Dr. Simmons.
And then Sonia's question, should it pull the same day if you rerun the table 4 report? That's you have to wait a day, correct, Nick?
Yeah, right. So the changes I just made won't reflect until overnight. The reporting system reloads. And I'm seeing, Karen, your question, 2 children on comp services. We entered the applicable LRE data in the workspace under plan, but they're both printing with none. You need to make sure you refinalize an event, whether that's a comparable services event or making an event through edit key dates. Just changing the value in the workspace won't update it, but changing that value and capturing it with an event will. And then Lindy, seeing your second note on this being beyond comparable services students, there are some students who might still be served under an Enrich IEP or an IEP written early last year who might have had this issue, and that's what I'm going to show how to correct here in a moment. Comparable services are the majority, or they are a component. The second component is what I'm going to show now, and I won't go through all the steps again, but it's also possible, and it's most likely you'll see these events are transfer imported events. So right here, this would say transfer/import. I had to make it using a fake user, but this is, if it says transfer/import, it means it most likely came through the Enrich migration. That was the only time we imported IEPs. Or if you're a district that returned to EdPlan SC following the initial go live date in July of 2024, this might have happened for you since then. So if you're a district that's returned to the system, this also might show for you. So it's a similar concept. If the student that is being served under the IEP, this placement value says none, but this student is not from a comparable services, right? It's just the IEP event that's most recent says none. You correct this in a similar way. It's a little bit more straightforward. So you don't have to regenerate a comparable services plan. let's say this IEP on 10-1, I know I need to go fix this because I did not make the correct placement selection. So I'm going to inactivate that event. And I remember that I did that on October 1st, 2025. I'm now going to come into the placement section. And let's say I know that Phil demo was being greater than 80% in the classroom. I'll save that answer. And then instead of having to go to the comparable services plan to regenerate that event, I'll just come into edit key dates. Instead of the IEP date, I remember that the start date for the event that was missing the placement value was October 1st. I'll hit save. And update this to end on 9/30. I'll confirm I do not need to use the signature panel. I'll hit save. Now when I go back to student history, I'll see that that IEP event is back. And when I look at the details pencil, my placement is there. So anytime you're getting none on the placement, it is likely due to the comp services issue or the fact that a student exited under a migrated IEP. There's always a chance that they exited under an IEP that was created via edit key dates, because if you don't go all the way through each tile in the IEP process, you can finalize an event without having made the selection. If the event was made by going tile by tile, it cannot be missing a placement value. That's one of the rules of completion. But if it's done through one of these other methods, it can, which might be why you're seeing none values. And the most common reason for that, comparable services plans and enrich migrated IEPs.
Yeah, so I actually think that's a great point, Nick, and for Jessica Larson for your comment. Yeah, like this is an outlier issue. This is not a I agree, it's a huge time vacuum. This is an artifact of switching systems. If you follow the process in EdPlan, you don't have to do any of these fixes or anything like that. But these are scenarios where the kind of the broad picture issue here is that the placement was not captured with the IEP event. So that's what we're fixing, right? We have to go in and fix that when this IEP event was created, no placement was associated with it. So I think that's the main point here. But if the event's created in EdPlan, then there's rules of completion in place that will ensure that the placement is associated with the IEP event. So it's definitely not designed to function this way. These are for these outlier situations where the placement has not been associated with the event, whether it's because of the comp services issue or they were transferred over from Enrich.
All right, and I'm seeing, I think Nikki and Stacy, I think I see you asking the same thing. Small reshow really quickly. What to do if a student is missing the placement value and that is not comp services related. It's done via edit key dates. So if you open up student history, inside of here, I've just kind of switched the events back so the bad event is still in place. And again, I know it's not fully accurate because I click on the details pencil. And when I look here, placement says none. So it's not random when the none shows up. Like every time none shows up, if you go find the IEP event that's most recent, you're going to see none in there. And Phil's point is a good one. It's because the selection was not present when the event was finalized. And this is the way to correct that. So to correct that, we need to take away that picture because this picture of the student, this IEP event, was missing a key piece of information. It was not there. So I'm going to inactivate that event. That's step one. Get rid of the picture that is feeding the report right now that does not have all of its information. Step two is to go inside of the IEP process and make that selection. So you don't need to refinalize the entire IEP. You just need to come to this section, if it was done via edit key dates, and make those choices. So I made these choices just about 2 minutes ago. That's why they're still there. I'm saying the student is 80% or more. Coming back to edit key dates. I'm going to remember the date of the event I just inactivated, which is October 1st. This is going to show the last IEP date, so it will be overdue, right? It's saying you're overdue. That's because I just inactivated the IEP. I'm going to type in my new date. 10/1. Then I'm going to hit save. Check confirm. Make sure the dates reflect reality. Inside of student history, you'll see that the red stop sign now became a green check mark. And now it looks the exact same, except this used to say Phil and now it says Nick. It's a new event. I'm going to click on the pencil. There's my value. I'm going to pause there. We're going to talk about LRE grade mismatch on child count specifically in a second here. What we just overviewed is applicable for either table 4 or for child count. If you are getting a none placement value, the common reasons are that it was under a comparable services plan, or for this year, that it was from an enriched migrated IEP. The way to fix that is to inactivate the event that has the none value in it, and then you want to reactivate or add the placement value and make a new event. And again, all of that is outlined in those steps within the table 4 article. Stacy, seeing your comment, I'm going to work backwards back up, and then Phil, I'm going to kind of rely on you to see where we might be. I see Stacy and Karen's. Stacy, if you're not seeing a delete box next to the IEP event for a student, it probably means there's a progress report card event on top of that. So if you look, here's a good example. I actually have one. So this IEP event right here, I don't have my delete checkbox, and that's because the progress report event was built on top of that. So to be able to inactivate my IEP event, I first inactivate the progress report that was built on it. And now you see that I get my checkbox. Good question. And then Karen, I don't know if I'm immediately able to answer that. If there are no previous events or key dates to change, or children are from out of state. Phil, I don't know if you have any thoughts or things to add there.
Yeah, if they, so we're talking about kids that would have had an exit event last year, correct? And so if there are no events or key dates, I don't know why they would even be in your report. So I'm struggling with that. There has to at least have been a comparable services event that took place. So if there are no events, I'm confused, Karen, if you want to put more information in there. I don't know how they would show up in your report if there are no events.
And Sonia, seeing your question, what would happen to the progress report event? You can just reactivate it after you reactivate the old IEP. The one that you just made will take its place, so it won't go away. Lindy, if you could submit that one in the Zendesk ticket, we can best support those individuals one-on-one. The two key elements for a student, thank you for submitting that, to be in the report is, do they have an ed plan eligibility? So when they exited, did ed plan think they were eligible? And that exit must have been between July 1st and June 30th. So those are the two basic conditions that'll bring someone into your report.
Yeah, I think the other question, Sonia, and to Jessica's point too, is that, yeah, I mean, we are looking at how, especially for this comp services one. So the enriched transfer ones, those are all going to be taken care of. That's not going to be an issue. That's an artifact of the transition, right? But after this year, except for those 4 districts that are still using enriched, this is not going to be an issue for anyone else. But I guess it could be if they're for transfer students, we need to make sure in that transfer comparable services process that there's a way that this placement value is getting captured with the event. So that's something that on our end we'll look into so that this isn't an issue, moving forward. Because yeah, agreed, we don't want to have to do this every time we try and do the exit, the exit report indicator.
And then Karen, seeing your comment, I think it might be best if you could both submit a ticket and then reach out to OSIS for additional guidance. I can help you make the system reflect what it needs to based on policy guidance from what you described. I just can't provide that policy guidance. So if you could both open a ticket and then maybe reach out to folks at OSIS, I think together we can help you. All right, I know we got 9 minutes, and I know we want to discuss the LRE grade mismatch, which is probably the most common error you're seeing on your child count. So I'm kind of shifting now. Everything I've talked about so far is applied to both table 4 and the child count. What I'm about to talk about just applies to child count, not to table 4. And that is the validation as labeled error inside of the report that you are probably getting most often. And that relates to LRE and grade mismatch. So I want to start this by saying, if you're getting this value for an ISP student, please submit a Zendesk ticket to us. The ISP students will want to handle differently because I'm in the IEP process. I'm going to show you how this works in the IEP process. But if you're getting that mismatch for an ISP student, please submit that to us in Zendesk. We can provide one-on-one support there. I'm going to give the general advice for most students, which are those served under an IEP. And this is the question that drives placement reporting inside of EdPlan SC. It's how you answer these prompts. So when you come into a student's profile, it is blank. They have not been answered. If you choose that a student is 6 to 21, you get a series of options that allow you to indicate where the student is served. And these are valid, these turn into codes in the report that are valid placement codes for that age. So if you're age 6 to 21 on the child count date, or if you're in kindergarten and you're 5 years old, these are the set of placement values available, in addition to the PPPS for students served under ISP, but you won't see that here. If you are 3 through 5, or a kindergarten student, or a 5-year-old who is not in kindergarten, you answer these questions. And for instance, this series of answers is, I believe, outside of regular classroom, at least 10 hours per week. This is a valid placement value for a student who's 3 to 5 or not kindergarten age 5. If you're getting that error, it means that the student's age and the value that have been selected here don't match up. So one example could be if I made these selections, I said the student is 3 to 5 and I made all my choices, but right now Phil Demo is in 5th grade. So if I finalize this IEP, this would flag as a grade, age, LRE mismatch because EdPlan knows the student is in 5th grade, but the placement value says they were 3 to 5. Those don't line up, so that's an error. The reverse is true, where if the student is currently 3 through 5 or in kinder age 5, and you have a school age placement, but the EdPlan sees that the student is in pre-K, that will not fly. It'll be flagged because it's saying you're using too old of a placement value for how old the student is. The vast majority of these, I believe, are students who are in kindergarten now. So this question is asked the user to indicate how old will the student be during October child count. So if a student was last year 5 years old, but they were not yet in kindergarten, and this was selected, and you answered all the questions to get a placement value for a student who was not school aged, but now the student has come, fall has come, and the student is in kindergarten. So their grade is kindergarten, their placement value is what I'm showing here. This says excluding kindergarten, right? So this decision might have been made in April, and this was filled out like it was true in April, but this question is asking what's true in October. So the vast majority of LRE grade mismatches, I believe you're going to be experiencing are students who are in kindergarten exactly, new kindergarten students this fall. And most often the case will be they still have a non-school age placement, but as of this October, this 4th Tuesday in October, they are a school age student, and that's going to throw up an error. And
I'll just say, Nick, that with like the change that's coming in December that I referenced earlier about on this placement page is meant to help teams address this. I think this is if you're not paying attention in this IEP meeting as to what this question says, meaning that it's future, how old will they be in October? And that's hard to think about when it's February. And And I think teams were just answering that as of February, not as of October. So the change coming in December is meant to help with this so that it's less confusing.
Dr. Simmons, seeing you indicate similar issue with K-5 students. I think that is very common. I think that's what most people will see is this error is clustered with your kinder students. It needs to be fixed in the system for it to update in the report. So that means a new IEP event must be generated that contains the correct placement value. As to how that new event is generated, I can't speak to that, but if the event is generated in EdPlan with the correct selection, it will appear updated inside of AR.
Yeah, it's likely an amendment, right? It could be an amendment without a meeting, but ultimately what they need to do is come into the IEP workspace, choose the correct placement, and then create a new IEP event. So that would be an amendment without a meeting.
That is what I've covered or what I plan to go over, and we're here in the last few minutes. So I want to again encourage Zendesk ticket submission. We're working through those as much as we can, preferencing table 4, knowing a submission deadline is closer than the child count submission deadline, but those are a priority right behind that. It's always helpful if you can indicate on first submission the students you're working with. I know it's easy during federal reporting to speak in trends. Like I'm seeing students that have this condition. But our first question back to you is probably going to be, can you confirm one student that's experiencing this? We want to make sure we're talking about what you're talking about. And then the last thing we're going to do is, excuse me, making sure that if the ticket says table 4 in the name or exit table, that gets directly routed to a special spot in Zendesk. Or if it says child count or table 1 and 3 in the title, it'll get routed to a special spot that gets picked up more quickly. So please continue to put those in the title of your tickets and review the updated Zendesk articles as you go through. All right. Phil, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Nick. I mean, yeah, I think those were the topics that we wanted to cover today. So we'll capture the chat here and have the conversations we need to have with OSIS around these pieces. And then I'll just point out our next office hours will be November 20th. Katie has a link there. And then there's also the FormStack link for if there are topics that you would like to see covered at the next office hours. Sherry, is there anything else you want?
I think that's it. Again, if you have any emergencies between now and Monday, before Katie's back, reach out to me. Otherwise, she'll be back on Monday. Reporting wise, file those Zendesk tickets so we can go ahead and help you quickly. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.